The dust had barely settled on Samuel Hartwell's boots when he saw her standing at the end of the dirt road. She wasn't what he had paid for, not even close. Samuel had ordered a bride the way other men ordered cattle or seed for spring planting. Through letters and arrangements made by reliable people in reliable towns, he had asked for someone young, someone untouched by the harsh realities of frontier life, someone who could bring light to his lonely homestead, and bear him children to carry on his name. But the woman who stepped down from the wagon that September morning carried shadows in her eyes that spoke of sorrows deeper than the canyon walls that surrounded his ranch. The autumn wind swept across the Wyoming territory, carrying with it the scent of dying grass and the promise of an early winter. Samuel stood in front of his cabin, his hat in his weathered hands, watching as the wagon driver helped the woman down. She moved with careful grace, as if each step required thought and purpose. She was beautiful, there was no denying that. Her dark hair was pulled back beneath a simple bonnet, and her dress, though travel-worn, had been well made. But it was the way she held herself that told Samuel everything he needed to know about the mistake that had been made. This was not the innocent girl he had requested. This was a woman who had lived, who had loved, who had lost Mr. Hartwell. Her voice was soft but steady as she approached. "I am Evangeline Morrison. I believe you were expecting me." Samuel nodded slowly, his eyes taking in the details he had missed from a distance. The slight hollow of her cheeks that spoke of recent hardship, the careful way she moved, as if protecting an old wound, the worn gold band on her finger that she hadn't bothered to remove. "Ma'am," he said simply, because what else was there to say? The arrangements had been made, the money had been paid, and she had traveled hundreds of miles to be here. The wagon driver unloaded her belongings, a single trunk and a carpet bag that had seen better days. Samuel paid the man and watched as he drove away, leaving them alone in the vast expanse of prairie and sky. "Your cabin is lovely," Evangeline said, though Samuel could hear the uncertainty in her voice. He looked at his home through her eyes. The rough-hewn logs, the simple porch he had built with his own hands, the garden plot where he grew vegetables to last through the winter. It was a good life, but a simple one, a lonely one. "It's not much," Samuel admitted, "but it's sturdy, keeps out the wind and the snow." Evangeline nodded and picked up her carpet bag. "Shall we go inside? I imagine you have questions." Samuel had many questions, but he wasn't sure he was ready for the answers. Instead, he carried her trunk inside and showed her to the small room he had prepared. It had taken him weeks to build the bed frame and to order the proper linens from town. He had imagined a young bride's delight at seeing her new home. Instead, he saw Evangeline's polite smile and the way she carefully placed her bag on the quilt as if afraid to claim too much space. "There's coffee on the stove," Samuel offered, "and I've got bread from yesterday's baking." They sat at his simple wooden table, the silence stretching between them like the prairie outside. Evangeline wrapped her hands around her cup, and Samuel noticed the way she seemed to draw comfort from its warmth. "The agency told you I was a widow," she said finally. Samuel shook his head. "They told me you were 18 and had been living with relatives in Ohio." Evangeline's laugh was bitter. "I was 18 once. That was 7 years ago." She looked up at him then, her eyes meeting his for the first time. "My husband died in the war, Mr. Hartwell. I've been trying to make my own way ever since. The agency lied to us both." "Then," Samuel said quietly, "it appears so." Evangeline took a sip of her coffee, and Samuel watched the way her shoulders seemed to relax slightly. "They told me you were a successful rancher looking for a companion, someone to help with the household and to provide ... conversation. Samuel almost smiled at that. "I reckon they told you what you wanted to hear, just like they told me." "And what did you want to hear, Mr. Hartwell?" The question hung in the air between them. Samuel considered his answer carefully, because he suspected that honesty might be the only thing that could salvage this situation. "I wanted to hear that someone might be willing to share this life with me," he said finally. "I'm 42 years old, Miss Morrison. I've got a good piece of land and I can provide for a family. But I've been alone out here for 8 years. And the silence gets heavy sometimes." Evangeline studied his face, and Samuel had the feeling she was seeing more than he had intended to reveal. "It's Mrs. Morrison," she said gently. "Or it was. I suppose I don't know what I am now." They finished their coffee in a more comfortable silence, and Samuel found himself watching the way the afternoon light fell across Evangeline's face. There was a strength in her features that spoke of resilience, of a woman who had faced hardship and survived it. "I'll sleep in the barn," Samuel said when they had finished eating, "until we figure out what comes next." Evangeline looked surprised. "That's not necessary. I'm sure we can come to some arrangement." But Samuel was already standing, collecting his hat from the hook by the door. It's necessary for me, he said simply. That night, Samuel lay in the hayloft listening to the wind rattling the barn doors and thinking about the woman in his cabin. He had imagined many scenarios when he had written to the agency. He had prepared himself for homesickness, for tears, even for outright rejection. But he hadn't prepared himself for the complicated grief he saw in Evangeline's eyes. The next morning, he found her in the kitchen, bacon sizzling in the pan and biscuits already golden in the oven. She had changed from her traveling dress into something more practical. Simple blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. You didn't have to cook, Samuel said, though the smell of breakfast made his stomach growl. I needed to keep my hands busy, Evangeline replied, and I thought you might be hungry. They ate together again, and this time the silence felt less awkward. Samuel found himself stealing glances at her, noting the efficient way she moved around the kitchen, the careful way she portioned out the food. Tell me about your ranch, Evangeline said as they cleared the dishes. Samuel was surprised by the question. He had expected her to want to talk about arrangements for her return journey, or about how they might explain the situation to the agency. It's not really a ranch yet, he admitted. More of a homestead. I've got 50 head of cattle and I'm hoping to expand next spring. The grass is good here, and there's a creek that runs year-round. Show me, she said simply. So Samuel took her outside and showed her the boundaries of his land. They walked to the creek where cottonwood trees provided shade and the water ran clear and cold. He showed her the pasture where his cattle grazed, and the smaller corral where he kept his horses. Evangeline listened without comment, but Samuel noticed the way she looked at everything, not with the casual interest of a visitor, but with the evaluating eye of someone who understood what it took to make a life from the land. You've built something good here, she said as they stood on a small rise overlooking the valley. It's a start, Samuel replied, but it's meant for more than one person. Evangeline turned to look at him then, and Samuel saw something shift in her expression. What are you saying, Mr. Hartwell? Samuel took off his hat and ran his hand through his hair. I'm saying that maybe the agency made a mistake, but that doesn't mean we have to. I'm saying that I don't care about your age or your situation. I care about whether you might want to stay. You don't know anything about me, Evangeline said quietly. I know you make good coffee and better biscuits, Samuel said, trying to lighten the moment. I know you're not afraid of work, and I know you've got the courage to travel hundreds of miles to start over. Evangeline was quiet for a long time, her eyes fixed on the mountains in the distance. When she finally spoke, her voice was so low, Samuel had to lean closer to hear her. My husband's name was Thomas. He was killed at Gettysburg when I was 22. For a year after that, I barely left my room. His parents took care of me, but I could see how hard it was for them, having me there as a constant reminder of what they had lost. Samuel waited, sensing there was more. I tried to make my own way after that. I worked as a seamstress, as a housekeeper, as a companion to elderly ladies. But people look at widows differently, Mr. Hartwell, especially young widows. They see you as either pitiable or dangerous, and neither is a comfortable way to live. And that's why you answered the agency's advertisement. Evangeline nodded. I thought perhaps out here, where my past wouldn't matter so much, I might find a place where I could belong again. Samuel studied her profile, the way she held herself straight despite the pain in her voice. Your past doesn't matter to me, he said, but your future does. Evangeline turned to look at him then, and Samuel saw tears she was trying not to shed. I loved Thomas very much, she said. I don't know if I can love anyone else that way again. I'm not asking you to, Samuel said gently. I'm asking you to consider whether you might want to try building something new with me, something that doesn't replace what you had, but stands alongside it. They walked back to the cabin in silence, but it was a different kind of silence now. Samuel could feel something changing between them, like the shift in the air before a storm. That evening, Evangeline cooked again, and they talked about practical things. The coming winter, the supplies they would need from town, the repairs that should be made to the barn roof before the snow came. If I stay, Evangeline said, as they cleaned up after dinner, what would you expect from me? Samuel considered the question carefully. Partnership, he said finally. Someone to share the work and the decisions. Someone to talk to when the days get long. And children. Samuel felt his cheeks warm. If that's something you wanted. But only if it's something you wanted. Evangeline nodded slowly. I need time to think. Take all the time you need, Samuel said. I'll keep sleeping in the barn. That's not necessary, Evangeline said. This is your home. Our home, Samuel corrected gently. If you decide to stay. The next few days fell into a rhythm that surprised Samuel with how natural it felt. Evangeline took over most of the cooking, and Samuel handled the outdoor work. In the evenings, they sat by the fire and talked about small things, the weather, the cattle, books they had read. Samuel found himself looking forward to these conversations more than he cared to admit. Evangeline had a quick mind and a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard. She asked thoughtful questions about his plans for the ranch, and offered suggestions that showed she understood more about farming and livestock than he had expected. On the fourth day, Samuel came in from checking the cattle to find Evangeline standing at the window, a letter in her hand. "News from town?" he asked. She turned, and Samuel saw that she had been crying. "From Thomas's mother," she said. "She writes to me sometimes, to let me know how the family is doing." Samuel waited, sensing that there was more. "She's getting remarried," Evangeline continued. "Thomas's father passed last spring, and she's found someone new. She sounds happy." "That's good," Samuel said carefully. Evangeline laughed, but there were tears in her eyes. "She says she hopes I find happiness again too. That Thomas would want that for me. What do you think?" Samuel asked. Evangeline set the letter down on the table and looked at him. "I think Thomas was a good man who loved me very much, and I think he would want me to be happy." Samuel felt his heart beat a little faster. "And are you happy here?" "I'm content," Evangeline said slowly. "For the first time in a long time, I feel useful. I feel like I have a purpose." But Evangeline moved closer, close enough that Samuel could smell the lavender soap she used. "But I'm scared," she admitted. "I'm scared of caring too much and losing it again. I'm scared of not caring enough and disappointing you." Samuel reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he took her hand in his. "I'm scared too," he said. "I'm scared of being alone for the rest of my life. But I'm more scared of not trying." Evangeline looked down at their joined hands, and Samuel saw her wedding ring catch the light. "I need to put this away," she said quietly. "You don't have to do that for me," Samuel said. "I need to do it for me," Evangeline replied. She slipped the ring from her finger and held it in her palm for a moment. Then she walked to her trunk and carefully placed it inside, wrapped in a piece of silk. When she turned back to Samuel, her eyes were bright with tears, but her smile was real. "Ask me again," she said. "Ask you what?" "Ask me to stay." Samuel felt something ease in his chest that he hadn't even realized was tight. "Evangeline Morrison, would you do me the honor of staying here with me, of being my wife and my partner and my friend?" "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will." Samuel crossed the room in 2 long strides and took her hands in his. "Are you sure?" Instead of answering with words, Evangeline reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the lines around his eyes. "I'm sure," she said. "I'm ready to try again." Samuel leaned down and kissed her, then, gently, carefully, as if she were made of something precious that might break. But Evangeline kissed him back with a warmth that spoke of healing, of new beginnings, of hope. When they broke apart, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "We'll go to town tomorrow," he said. "Find the preacher and do this properly." "Tomorrow," Evangeline agreed. "But tonight, tonight, we're just us," Samuel finished. Just Samuel and Evangeline, figuring out what comes next. They spent that evening planning their future. Samuel talked about his dreams for the ranch, about the house he wanted to build when they could afford it. Evangeline talked about the garden she would plant in the spring, about the preserves she would put up for winter. And slowly, carefully, they talked about the life they might build together. Not a replacement for what they had lost, but something entirely new. Something that honored their past while embracing their future. As the fire burned low in the grate, Samuel looked at the woman who had come to him by mistake and realized that sometimes the best things in life were the ones you never thought to ask for. "No regrets?" he asked as they prepared to go to their separate rooms one last time. Evangeline smiled, and Samuel saw that the shadows in her eyes had lifted, replaced by something that looked remarkably like joy. "No regrets," she said. "Only possibilities." The next morning dawned clear and bright, with the kind of crisp autumn air that spoke of winter's approach but also of the promise of spring beyond. Samuel hitched up the wagon while Evangeline packed a basket with food for the journey to town. As they rode across the prairie, Samuel found himself stealing glances at the woman beside him. She sat straight and confident, her face turned toward the sun, and Samuel thought that he had never seen anything more beautiful. "Thank you," Evangeline said suddenly. "For what?" "For seeing me," she said simply. "Not just the widow or the mistake or the woman who wasn't what you ordered. For seeing me." Samuel reached over and took her hand. "Thank you for staying. Thank you for asking me to." The town was small and dusty, but the church was clean and the preacher was kind. He asked no questions about their unusual courtship or about the speed with which they had decided to marry. He simply smiled and said the words that bound them together. With the afternoon sun streaming through the simple windows and the sound of wind in the cottonwoods outside, as they rode home in the gathering dusk, Samuel felt a peace he had never known before. Beside him, his wife hummed softly under her breath, a melody he didn't recognize but that sounded like happiness. "What are you thinking about?" Samuel asked as they crested the hill that looked down into their valley. Evangeline was quiet for a moment, her eyes on the cabin below. "I'm thinking about all the evenings we'll sit by that fire," she said. "All the mornings we'll wake up in that house. All the seasons we'll watch change from that porch. All the children who might play in that yard," Samuel added softly. Evangeline smiled. "Maybe," she said. "If we're blessed." "We're already blessed," Samuel said, bringing the wagon to a stop in front of their home. As he helped Evangeline down from the wagon, Samuel caught sight of something that made him pause. There, in the garden plot he had never quite known what to do with, someone had planted late-blooming flowers, chrysanthemums in shades of gold and bronze, hardy enough to survive the first frost and beautiful enough to brighten the approaching winter. "When did you do that?" Samuel asked. Evangeline followed his gaze and smiled. "This morning while you were hitching the wagon, I found the plants growing wild by the creek and thought they might like a proper home." Samuel looked at the flowers, then at his wife, and felt his heart expand with a love so fierce and unexpected that it took his breath away. "Welcome home, Mrs. Hartwell," he said. "Welcome home," Evangeline replied, and Samuel knew that she wasn't just talking to him, but to herself as well. As they walked toward their door together, Samuel thought about the letter he would write to the agency. He would tell them that there had been a mistake, that they had sent him the wrong woman entirely. But he would also tell them that sometimes mistakes were the best things that could happen to a man. Sometimes what you needed wasn't what you thought you wanted. Sometimes the broken pieces of two different lives could be put together to make something stronger and more beautiful than either had been alone. The autumn wind swept across the prairie, carrying with it the scent of wood smoke and the promise of winter. But inside the cabin, as Samuel and Evangeline sat down to their first dinner as husband and wife, there was only warmth and light and the quiet joy of two people who had found in each other exactly what they hadn't known they were looking for. Outside, the chrysanthemums swayed in the breeze, their golden faces turned toward the stars, blooming brave and bright against the coming cold. The first snow fell on a Tuesday morning in late November, 3 weeks after Samuel and Evangeline had spoken their vows in the little church in town. Evangeline woke to find the world outside transformed, blanketed in white that stretched as far as the eye could see. She stood at the kitchen window, watching the flakes drift down like feathers, and felt a contentment she hadn't known was possible. Behind her, she could hear Samuel moving about, stoking the fire and preparing for the day's work. These small domestic sounds had become precious to her, proof that she was no longer alone in the world. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Samuel said, coming to stand behind her. His hands settled gently on her shoulders, and Evangeline leaned back against his warmth. "It makes everything look clean," she said, "like the world is starting fresh." Samuel pressed a soft kiss to the top of her head. "That's what it feels like to me too." Their marriage had settled into a rhythm that surprised them both with its ease. They worked side by side during the day, Samuel tending the cattle and repairing equipment, Evangeline managing the household and helping with the lighter chores. In the evenings they sat by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes simply enjoying each other's company. There had been awkward moments, of course. The first night Samuel had moved back into his own bedroom, they had lain awake on opposite sides of the door, both uncertain of what the other expected. It was Evangeline who had finally knocked softly and asked if he might like some company. "Only if you're sure," Samuel had said, his voice careful. "I'm sure," Evangeline had replied, and she had been, not because passion had swept her away, but because she had discovered that she trusted this quiet, gentle man completely. Their physical relationship had developed slowly, built on respect and growing affection rather than desperate need. Samuel never pushed, never demanded, and Evangeline found herself responding to his patience with a warmth that surprised her now. As they prepared breakfast together in the early morning light reflecting off the snow, Evangeline felt a peace that she had thought lost to her forever. "I'll need to ride out and check on the cattle," Samuel said, accepting the cup of coffee she offered. "Make sure they're finding shelter. Be careful," Evangeline said automatically, then caught herself. It was something a wife would say, she realized. Something she had never thought she would say again. Samuel smiled, understanding. "I'll be careful," he promised. "And I'll be back before dark." Evangeline spent the morning baking bread and mending clothes. Tasks that would have felt like drudgery in her old life but now gave her satisfaction. This was her home, her life, her choice. Every loaf she baked, every shirt she mended, was an investment in the future she and Samuel were building together. She was just pulling the second batch of bread from the oven when she heard the sound of horses approaching. Multiple horses, riding hard. Evangeline set down the bread and moved to the window, her heart beginning to race. 3 men on horseback were approaching the cabin, their faces obscured by the scarves they wore against the cold. Something about the way they rode, the way they sat their horses, made Evangeline's breath catch in her throat. She knew that silhouette, even after 3 years, even wrapped in winter clothes. She knew that proud set of shoulders, that particular way of holding the reins. Thomas's brother, Marcus Morrison, was riding toward her cabin. Evangeline's hands began to shake as she watched the riders approach. Marcus had been a cavalry officer during the war, and he still carried himself like a soldier. The 2 men with him looked cut from the same cloth, hard men with watchful eyes. She thought of Samuel, out in the pasture checking the cattle, too far away to hear if she called for help. Not that she was sure she wanted help. Not yet. Not until she understood what Marcus wanted. The riders pulled up in front of the cabin, and Marcus dismounted with the fluid grace she remembered. He had always been the more dashing of the Morrison brothers, the one who drew admiring glances from young ladies. Thomas had been steadier, kinder, but Marcus had been the one who could charm birds from trees. Right now, standing in her yard with snow beginning to gather on his shoulders, Marcus looked anything but charming. Evangeline opened the door before he could knock, stepping out onto the porch despite the cold. She wanted the advantage of height, wanted to meet him as an equal rather than invite him into her sanctuary. "Marcus," she said quietly, "this is unexpected." "Hello, Evangeline." Marcus pulled off his hat, revealing hair that was more gray than she remembered. The war had aged him, she realized. They had all been aged by it. "You're looking well, thank you. What brings you to Wyoming territory?" Marcus's smile was sharp. "Can't a man visit his former sister-in-law?" Evangeline corrected gently. "And you're a long way from home." One of the men with Marcus shifted in his saddle, and Evangeline noticed the way his coat fell open to reveal the butt of a revolver. Her mouth went dry. "Aren't you going to invite us in?" Marcus asked. "It's cold out here, and we've been riding since before dawn." Evangeline hesitated. Every instinct told her not to let these men into her home. But she also knew that refusing hospitality in this weather could be seen as suspicious, and suspicious people asked questions that might lead them to information she wasn't ready to share. "Of course," she said finally, "but I should warn you, my husband will be back soon." Marcus's eyebrows rose. "Husband? Well, congratulations. I wasn't aware you had remarried." "It was recent," Evangeline said, leading them into the cabin. "Very recent." She served them coffee and some of the bread she had just finished baking, her hands steady despite the fear that was building in her chest. The 2 men with Marcus said little, but their eyes moved constantly, taking in every detail of the cabin. "This is cozy," Marcus said, settling back in his chair. "Quite a change from the house in Philadelphia." "I like it here," Evangeline replied. "It suits me, I'm sure it does." Marcus took a sip of his coffee, his eyes never leaving her face. "You always were adaptable. It's one of the things Thomas loved about you." The mention of her first husband's name hit Evangeline like a physical blow, but she kept her expression neutral. "What do you want, Marcus?" "Straight to the point." "I appreciate that." Marcus set down his cup and leaned forward. "I want what Thomas left you, Evangeline. What you took when you disappeared." Evangeline's blood turned to ice water. "I don't know what you're talking about, don't you?" Marcus's voice was still pleasant, but there was steel underneath. "Thomas was carrying something when he died at Gettysburg. Something valuable. Something that should have come to his family. Thomas died with nothing but the clothes on his back and his father's watch." Evangeline said firmly. "The army returned what they could find." "The army returned what they thought they found," Marcus corrected. "But we both know Thomas was carrying more than that." We both know he gave it to you before he left for war. Asterisk, Evangeline stood abruptly, moving to the stove to refill the coffee pot. It gave her a moment to think, a moment to control her expression, because Marcus was right, and they both knew it. Thomas had given her something before he left, something he had asked her to keep safe, to never tell anyone about, something that could get people killed if it fell into the wrong hands. I think you should leave, Evangeline said, turning back to face him. My husband will be home soon, and he won't appreciate finding strangers in his house. Your husband, Marcus mused. What's his name? What does he do? How did you meet him? The questions came rapid fire, and Evangeline realized that Marcus was trying to catch her in a lie. He suspected something about her marriage, about her life here. His name is Samuel Hartwell, she said calmly. He's a rancher. We met through mutual friends. Mutual friends, Marcus repeated. How romantic, and how convenient that you found love so far from home. So far from anyone who might ask awkward questions about your past. One of Marcus's companions spoke for the first time. Boss, maybe we should quiet. Jenkins, Marcus said sharply. Then, to Evangeline, you've made a nice life for yourself here. Quiet, remote, the kind of place where a person could hide indefinitely. I'm not hiding from anything, Evangeline said, but her voice sounded strained even to her own ears, aren't you? Marcus stood, and Evangeline was reminded of how tall he was, how imposing he could be when he chose. Then you won't mind if we search the premises? You have no right. I have every right, Marcus interrupted. That was my brother's property, which makes it my family's property. Property that was stolen. Nothing was stolen, Evangeline said desperately. Thomas gave me. She stopped, realizing too late that she had just confirmed Marcus's suspicions. Marcus smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Thomas gave you what, Evangeline? What did my brother give you that was so important you've been running from it for 3 years? Before Evangeline could answer, she heard the sound she had been both hoping for and dreading. Samuel's voice, calling out as he approached the cabin. Evangeline, whose horses are these? Marcus's hand moved to his coat, and Evangeline saw the shape of a gun beneath the fabric. Her heart began to race. Please, she whispered, whatever you want, we can discuss it, but don't hurt him. He doesn't know anything about this. That depends on you, Marcus said quietly. Call him in. Act natural. And remember, Evangeline, I have 2 armed men with me, and your husband is alone. The door opened, and Samuel stepped inside, stamping snow off his boots. He looked up with a smile that faded when he saw the 3 strangers in his kitchen. Evangeline, he said carefully. Samuel, this is Marcus Morrison, Evangeline said, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. Thomas's brother. These are his ... associates. Samuel's eyes sharpened, and Evangeline saw him take in the tension in the room, the way she was standing rigid by the stove. Mr. Morrison, Samuel said politely, but Evangeline could hear the wariness in his voice. This is unexpected. Have you come far? Very far, Marcus said. I was just telling your wife how nice it is to see her again. We have so much to catch up on. Samuel moved slowly across the room, positioning himself slightly in front of Evangeline. The gesture was subtle, but Marcus noticed it. Protective husband, Marcus observed. How touching. Tell me, Mr. Hartwell, what do you know about your wife's first marriage? I know she was widowed young, Samuel said steadily. I know she loved her husband very much. Beyond that, her past is her business. How noble, Marcus said mockingly. But I'm afraid Evangeline's past is very much my business too. You see, when my brother died, he left behind some unfinished business. Business that your wife has been avoiding. Samuel looked at Evangeline, questions in his eyes. She wanted desperately to tell him everything, to ask for his help, but she was terrified of what Marcus might do if she revealed too much. I think you should explain what you want, Samuel said to Marcus. Clearly what I want is what belongs to my family, Marcus replied. What I want is the information my brother died protecting. Information that your wife has been keeping from us. Information about what? Marcus smiled. About where the gold is hidden. The words hung in the air like smoke. Samuel's eyes widened slightly, and Evangeline felt her knees go weak. What gold? Samuel asked. The gold my brother and his unit recovered from a Confederate payroll wagon, Marcus said. The gold they buried somewhere between Virginia and Pennsylvania before Thomas was killed. The gold he told his beloved wife about in his letters home. Evangeline closed her eyes. She had hoped this day would never come, had prayed that the secret would die with her. But Marcus had found her, and now Samuel was going to learn the truth about what she had been carrying all these years. Evangeline, Samuel said quietly, is this true? She opened her eyes and looked at him, her husband, her partner, the man who had given her a chance at a new life. She saw confusion in his face, and hurt, but not condemnation. Not yet. Yes, she whispered. It's true. The admission seemed to release something in the room. Marcus relaxed slightly, satisfied that his suspicions had been confirmed. His companions shifted in their seats, hands moving closer to their weapons. Finally, Marcus said, "Now we're getting somewhere. Where is it, Evangeline? Where are Thomas's letters?" "They were destroyed," Evangeline said quickly. "I burned them after." "Don't lie to me," Marcus snapped. Thomas was meticulous about everything. He would have drawn maps, written detailed instructions, and you would have kept every word he ever wrote to you. He was right, of course. Evangeline had kept all of Thomas's letters, including the ones that contained information about the hidden gold. She had read them so many times she had memorized every word, every landmark, every detail that might lead someone to the burial site. But she had also learned, over the years, what kind of men would kill for that information. "Even if I had them," she said carefully, "what makes you think the gold is still there? It's been 3 years. Someone could have found it by now." "Someone could have," Marcus agreed. "But I don't think they have. I think it's still buried exactly where Thomas left it, waiting for someone smart enough to follow his clues." Samuel spoke up. "Why come here? Why now?" Marcus turned to him with a look that was almost pitying. "Because, Mr. Hartwell, I'm not the only one looking for that gold. There are dangerous men who know Thomas had that information when he died. They've been searching for his widow for years, and sooner or later, they're going to find her." Evangeline felt the blood drain from her face. "What men?" "Confederate agents who want their payroll back," Marcus said. "Union officers who want to cover up the fact that the gold went missing in the first place. Treasure hunters who think they can claim it by right of discovery. Take your pick, Evangeline. You've made a lot of enemies without even knowing it." Samuel's hand found Evangeline's, and she clung to it like a lifeline. "So what do you propose?" Samuel asked. "I propose we work together," Marcus said. "Evangeline gives me the letters, I recover the gold, and everyone gets their fair share, including your wife's new husband, of course. Consider it a wedding present." "And if we refuse?" Samuel asked. Marcus's smile was cold. "Then I leave you to face the other interested parties alone. And believe me, Mr. Hartwell, they won't be as reasonable as I am." Evangeline looked at Samuel, trying to read his expression. She could see him processing everything he had learned, trying to understand how the woman he had married had become tangled up in something like this. "I need to think about this," Evangeline said finally. "You have until morning," Marcus replied. "My men and I will camp in your barn tonight. Tomorrow you give me what I want, or we all deal with the consequences." As Marcus and his companions filed out of the cabin, Evangeline sank into a chair, her legs finally giving out. Samuel knelt beside her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Tell me everything," he said quietly, "from the beginning." And so, as the snow continued to fall outside, and the fire crackled in the grate, Evangeline told her husband about the letters Thomas had written from the battlefield, about the Confederate gold his unit had found and hidden, about the maps and landmarks he had described in careful detail, about the burden she had carried for 3 years, and the fear that had driven her to seek a new life so far from everything she had known. Samuel listened without interruption, his face grave. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked finally. "Because I hoped it would never matter," Evangeline said. "Because I wanted to leave that life behind and build something new with you." "But you can't leave it behind, can you?" "Not completely." Evangeline shook her head, tears beginning to fall. "I'm so sorry, Samuel. I should have told you." "I should have." "Hey," Samuel said gently, cupping her face in his hands. "Look at me." Evangeline met his eyes, expecting to see anger or disappointment. Instead, she saw determination. "We're going to figure this out," Samuel said, "together." But Marcus was right. There are dangerous men looking for that information. If we give it to him, we might be safe. If we don't, we face whatever comes," Samuel said firmly. "But we do it together. You're my wife, Evangeline. Your burdens are my burdens now." Evangeline felt fresh tears start, but these were tears of gratitude rather than fear. "What did I do to deserve you?" Samuel smiled, the first real smile she had seen from him since Marcus arrived. "You answered that advertisement. Best mistake that agency ever made." They spent the evening planning, discussing options, trying to find a path forward that didn't end in violence. But as night fell and the wind began to howl around the cabin, they both knew that their peaceful life had been shattered. The past had found them, and tomorrow they would have to decide how to face it. Outside in the barn, Marcus and his men settled in for the night. and somewhere out in the storm, other riders might already be following their trail, drawn by the scent of gold and the promise of blood. The winter that had seemed so beautiful that morning now felt like a trap, sealing them all into the valley together until spring came to set them free. If any of them lived that long,